I think we're live. Let me just double check again. Can you guys hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Download with Joe. A really exciting episode today. Everyone that's tuned in, whether it's been over the last few weeks or just for the last week in particular, you'll know that there's been different themes that Joe and I like to stick to, which pulls out a lot of really good information from his newsletter and then just tries to keep us very relevant in any of the latest trends or technologies week by week. We've always wanted to bring on guests and want to make sure that we bring on the right individuals across various different aspects or niches within the industry. And I'm proud and pleased to say that we've got a really, really cool guest today. So my name's Lewis. I'm the founder of NMC. As always, here with Joe Amador, founder of Amador Consulting. Today we're with McGee, who is the founder and CEO of WattCarbon. McGee, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, and excited to be your inaugural guest.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
It's almost it's almost like going on Howard Stern or something like that, right? This is a moment here where you know you've made it when you've got Joe Amador giving you the hard questions.
I don't know if I have a lot of hard questions. I think in a lot of ways, just what you're doing, I've always seen as pretty innovative and somewhat differentiated, and we'll talk about that. McGee, maybe to start, I'll just let you do a quick intro, and then you can introduce us to WattCarbon. I think the other point, the company, I think you've been fulfilling this broader vision. So when I first heard about the company, what you did was very much a niche within what you do today. But I'll turn it over to you to just give a quick intro, and then we can talk a little bit more about the market, where you're going, what you're doing, so on and so forth.
For sure. I mean, we think of ourselves as a climate company, that's trying to solve the problem of energy decarbonization. I think there's a lot to it, so which is why we've kind of taken it one step at a time. We'll talk about all that, but the way we look at it is roughly half of all emission reductions that are going to happen in the next couple of decades are going to come from what we think of as the last mile of energy use. This is our buildings, transportation, distributed generation, and that sector has largely been undercapitalized. We've put a lot of resources into first mile decarbonization solutions, building massive wind and solar facilities, which are great. But that's going to keep us to about 4.5 degrees of warming, and we've got a lot more to do than that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the opportunities is to kind of think about how buildings, that last mile, could be the target of investment by the private sector. So we think about corporates driving a lot of this, big wind and solar boom over the last couple of years. What if we could have the same, financial data infrastructure for the last mile that would unlock corporate investment into building decarbonization? So for WattCarbon, we've really kind of been building out all of the requirements for that. A system of record, a marketplace, and the kind of financial infrastructure that's required to actually unlock that capital.
Yeah, it's great. I remember, I think we first connected when your initial foray was real-time carbon data. And as a former climate consultant doing a lot of emissions inventory work back, when it was all spreadsheet based, and then realizing, wait, spreadsheets are not really an efficient way for an institution to collect carbon or collect energy data and convert to carbon. And then, everyone just used egret factors within the software products, and egret factors, there's like 25 regions, 28 regions. And you're basically just doing very simple math, right? This is your energy use. This is the emissions factor. You're in, Illinois, or you're in part of Illinois on PJM. So you basically built out a much more granular and kind of real-time method of doing that. And I thought that alone is a really big need. Silly of me to know that was just the first step. And so maybe talk a little bit more about, and I should say, you were on James Dice's podcast, so very much a friend of the show, where you kind of laid this out with a couple of clients and partners. But maybe just for those who haven't gone back to that, which I would encourage anyone to do, that episode, kind of just talk through the bigger, the marketplace, I guess, is kind of the bigger piece of this. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think, it's helpful for the context that prior to doing WattCarbon, I was the CTO at a company called Recurve, and we were building measurement and verification tools for utilities to evaluate the hourly impacts of their demand side energy program. So we'd already been thinking quite a bit about the importance of hourly. Obviously, the sun shines during the day, the wind mostly blows during the night. And if you're thinking about the carbon emissions intensity of your energy use, that's the thing that you have to pay attention to. And frankly, most folks who are looking at this are still in that kind of annual paradigm. And the other piece of it is that if you're going to be making these investments into decarbonizing your fleet, you want to know if it's working or not. And the old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. So but it wasn't obvious how you would do that. And I think for us, the importance of kind of creating that trust is kind of eating your own dog food, as it were. So we wanted to build out systems to start with that we knew that we could sell independently, right? They were so good that you could sell this as a standalone product, because that became the foundation for the WattCarbon registry, which is we call it WEATS, the WattCarbon Energy Attribute Tracking System, and that's really the core of unlocking a marketplace. A marketplace does nobody any good if you can't trust what's in it. And so by backing everything with granular hourly carbon emissions accounting, creating sort of individual serial numbers for every single watt hour, every single gram of carbon that is saved, you can track that back down to the source. That's what allows you to have confidence that the claims that you're making around your emission reductions are actually happening. And then I think this is a big differentiator between a lot of what we've seen in the kind of nature-based offset world, where it's like, here's 100 acres of trees or something, and then you can't really know if this was and they have all sorts of problems like leakage and double claiming and all the rest of that we can avoid if we do it right within the built environment.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe walk through maybe there's a few threads there to talk about, but do you want to walk through maybe very quickly or concisely an example of a project coming together? Because I think the most interesting thing for me was just listening to how the marketplace worked in practice. And I'm here in Boulder. The company that was on one side of that marketplace was based here, home electrification company Elephant Energy. Maybe just walk through that, because I think that for those listening here will say, oh, I get it. I see how we're allowing a building to decarbonize by funding heat pump installs. Maybe not just heat pumps, but Elephant is, that's I think their number one thing. Maybe talk through that. Yeah,
I think that'd be great. Prior to listening to that podcast, similar to you, Joe, I wasn't quite sure how it was all put together, but now I do, and I think a lot of people here are thinking it's quite a novel technology, or a marketplace, but not quite sure how it fits or how you put it together.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of our inspiration was, asking this question: what's been so successful about the first mile? Like, how have we been able to scale wind and solar investment the way that we have? And part of the reason for that is there's actually a framework within the greenhouse gas protocols, the system that most corporates use to report their emissions, where they can purchase clean energy and use that. We talk about this concept of an offset in a way, and it's got a fairly deservedly pejorative tone to it nowadays. But the idea from the greenhouse gas protocols is that when you buy electricity from the grid, you can't choose which electrons you get. Right? You have the green ones and the brown ones are they all come the same. But if you wanted to voluntarily try to do something about that, try to do something about the cleanliness of the electricity, you can go out and invest in wind and solar projects. And as proof of that investment, you get a renewable energy certificate, a REC. And that REC represents a megawatt hour of clean energy that goes into the grid, kind of on your behalf. And so you're matching your load with an equivalent amount of clean energy going onto the grid. And so if you think about, a situation where you're in an office building, and that office building, maybe you don't have control over that office building's infrastructure. It has a boiler, and it has emissions associated with that. Or maybe you do have control, but the capital cycle is such that you're not going to be able to really replace that for 10 more years. How do you kind of mitigate the environmental footprint of that boiler, or whatever that system might be, in a way that kind of makes sense? I mean, you could go buy some trees, right? But what you really want to do is reduce emissions elsewhere, especially for projects that probably aren't going to happen otherwise. And this is where the concept of a REC, a renewable energy credit, but for demand side interventions, kind of came out of it. So we call these energy attribute certificates, EACs, and they reflect the impact of investments that you're making into the built environment. So take a company like Elephant Energy that's going out and selling heat pumps to their customers. Well, a lot of customers look at that and they go, that's not a great deal. Like, you're asking me to pay more for this equipment that's maybe there's some benefits here, but honestly, I'm paying more to help the planet, and there's a finite number of people who are willing to take on that expense. But if you can say, actually, it's going to be less because we've got a commitment from this building owner that wants to mitigate the emissions in their building, and they're going to fund part of your heat pump to get you across that line, to make it so that it's cost effective for you. Now, all of a sudden, it's such an easier sell for Elephant Energy to come in and sell that heat pump. And we have now the same kind of investment that's been so successful with wind and solar transitioning over to the demand side, where we can now start, batteries and heat pumps and EV chargers and demand response and energy efficiency. All of those great things that we know are critical to decarbonizing the last mile can get the kind of investment they need to scale across communities.
Right. Now, heat pump is a good example because for a homeowner, one, you're probably, if it's a large commercial building, they're already budgeting a capital plan, right? So they, at some point they probably realize we're going to have to replace our chiller plant or our boiler. For a homeowner, it's kind of like, wait, but the heat pump, typically the cell you would get on a heat pump for your house before the WattCarbon marketplaces, well, you're paying more up front, but you're paying less over time. And that is generally true with heat pumps. It's a harder sell when you're used to just buying, I won't pick on a vendor, but this is the economical model that's the best model, price performance based. Yeah. So, or upfront price performance.
People aren't crazy. If you say, hey, don't take your family to Disneyland this year and get this heat pump instead. They're like, well, I don't know. Is that really worth it or not? And I think that, the other piece of, just to kind of pick up on that thread that I think is absolutely critical for us to be thinking about is the cost of financing these projects for, individuals, for small businesses, especially for lower income folks. Now, if you're rich and you want to get a heat pump, you can just pay the $20,000 in cash and that's that, right?
Yeah.
But let's say that that's not feasible for you, which is the case for almost everybody. Well, now you've got to take out a loan to pay for that. And at today's rates, that loan's going to take that heat pump from $20,000 to more than $30,000 net for you.
Yeah.
But if you're low income, you're looking at $40,000 because interest rates are so much higher for low income folks. Now, for the exact same product, you're charging poor people twice as much as rich people for the sake of the climate. And I think this is something that we have to reckon with as decarbonization, as climate folks. That we cannot impose this sort of regressive policy on our communities. And so this is kind of that third leg of decarbonizing the last mile, is kind of figuring out how do we remake project finance in a way that takes that burden off the end customer and puts it into the hands of those who can afford it and who understand how to manage risk. And so what we've been building at WattCarbon is a finance product that allows corporates to make these investments, just like they would invest in a wind or solar PPA or VPPA, where the power purchase agreement. They can make that same investment into last mile energy decarbonization projects that eliminate that penalty for low income homeowners, for business owners, right? For all of those folks who that extra money that they would be paying is basically coming off of the kitchen table. And so now we have a system that allows for fairness, and we would call it equity, to prevail within decarbonization. And I think that's really important for kind of getting public opinion behind, the kind of the climate movement.
Right. And oh, go ahead, Lewis. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that important? Because from a commercial versus MFP or residential focus, surely you need, from a residential standpoint, that change management education piece for people to really understand the value of a marketplace like WattCarbon, or even a heat pump per se.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. There's, we still install something like 20,000 natural gas furnaces and water heaters per day in the United States.
20,000 per day. Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So that they're going to lock in, however many tons that is of CO2 emissions for the next 20 years. But I think it's not just, I think it's actually, like, in the commercial real estate space, an even harder problem and more important problem for us to solve, where we've got this split incentive between tenants and owners, where we see this, this is the rise and fall of the green lease. We thought, what we'll do is mandate sustainability within a green lease and, make you pay $5 more per square foot to buy green energy from the local utility. And everybody kind of hates that. And it never really results in anything besides maybe a few light bulbs being changed out. And what we've got to figure out is how to take that same, what we've been working on is thinking about, as a tenant, these are a lot of times my scope 3 emissions in the world of carbon accounting. How can I make a direct investment into the building that I'm occupying to take some of the capital burden off of the owner to achieve these decarbonization goals that my company has set out for myself? And using this concept of the energy attribute certificate, the EAC, part of our finance package is actually putting it into the hands of the tenant to make that investment into the property in which they've got their lease, but being able to claim the EACs from that project, so they can say, I've made this specific investment. This landlord has benefited from my capital coming in and paying for the boiler upgrade, but for the next 10 years, I get to put that on my net zero report. And so you have, so this is part of how these, we can start to unlock more and more capital, even into the commercial space, where it hasn't necessarily been in anybody's, individual interest to do these projects. I mean, maybe in New York with Local Law 97, it starts to become in some people's individual interest. But by and large,
Boston and Bordeaux,
Right. And so if we think about, we've got probably 3 decades to decarbonize the last mile of our energy system. And so we need about $10 trillion of capital going into our buildings. That's got to come from the balance sheets of the largest corporates, many of whom are occupying these spaces in our buildings.
Right. And a couple just kind of added points there, and just kind of thoughts. So one, when you look at the large corporations, Fortune 500, bigger than the Fortune 500, or more companies than the Fortune 500, a lot of them own some real estate. They might not actually own it technically, but if you have kind of control over that entire space, and there are no other tenants, you have some more authority or autonomy there. But there's still a lot of large corporations where, when you look at their kind of longer tail workforce, think of any large bank, any large tech company, any large pharma company, they have a lot of offices distributed around the country. And if they're really small, might be a floor on a big building, they're just a tenant there. So I think right now, a lot of them have probably focused on, well, we own this headquarters building. We will do everything possible to get it, maybe not to net zero, but we will invest a lot in decarbonization technology. If they can then go to all these other smaller spaces, that unlocks a big deal for them. The other thought I had, the split incentive still, I've seen a lot of companies that come up with interesting approaches to solve, if you will, the split incentive. And I guess the air quotes are not to say they're not really solving it. It's just there's a lot of complexity there. And I think the way commercial real estate works, on one hand, the building is the business, right? So if you are an investor in that commercial real estate fund and you say, I want you to decarbonize, that's a goal I have, that is pressing the commercial real estate firm to do it. But when it cascades down to, well, the tenant pays for the energy, we want to invest, it becomes very tricky. Some of the models I've seen, they work, right? Like when you do the math, you say everyone is winning, but because there's somebody in that equation that says, well, I don't understand why I'm paying this to get this other money back. And it's, I could go deeper, but I think there's
think
still
that,
more innovation that's required. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the complexity of these is mind-boggling in a way, but I think that's kind of to the core of where I started with WattCarbon, was building a system of record. And if you can't, if you can't manage to it, you're emailing spreadsheets, and you've got somebody who's responsible for all this, but then they leave, and everybody's kind of looking at it like, how did we do this again? And you need, and that's the value of the energy attribute certificate, is that it specifically assigns responsibility to the appropriate counterparties. And so that while there is a complex coordination problem, everybody knows at the end of the day, this is audible, verifiable system of record, kind of like your bank, that allows you to manage the complexity of trying to achieve one of these decarbonization projects.
Right. I mean, the other area where there's a lot of complexity, just to kind of segue into another quick question, when I look at when any of us, I think, look at the landscape of solutions, what we find is, depending on, if you think high level, there's hardware, there's software, there's services. Obviously, on the hardware side, the carbon emitting technologies, there's kind of a limited number of vendors, right? Being an HVAC company, being a boiler company, there's a lot of barriers to entry. Now, interestingly, you see a lot more heat pump companies, really more for residential, just we're building our own heat pumps. I've seen that more in Europe than in America. So there's some innovation there. It's not like no one can get into that market, but in terms of building a chiller, a heat pump chiller, I don't know that we're going to see this explosion of new companies saying, hey, we're going to go compete with the big guys. So you have consistency there. When you get to, the services on the other side, it's very distributed, right? The installers and the service providers of any number of those types of equipment, I think in America, we're talking tens of thousands of entities, both residential, commercial. I think one of the stats I saw from the DOE was average size of companies like 10 people. Average revenue is maybe a couple $1 million. The other thing I remember seeing, failure rates in year one are like 50%, right? So like, I want to be an HVAC. I'm an HVAC engineer. I'm working for a larger company. I want to go do that on my own. 50% chance that business ends in the next year. But then even I think for all these businesses, the failure rate was, 10, 15%. So you have a lot of fragmentation there too. And then you look in the middle where the software layer is, that's I think what we see most clearly. There's dozens, hundreds of companies, you could argue, they all have a slightly different approach, or some of them have a slightly different approach. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of, you talk to a building owner, you talk to a building operator, part of the reason they pick one vendor over another is just, well, I met this vendor at this conference, or I have a relate, so there's a lot of fragmentation there. I think what's interesting about WattCarbon is you could argue, and maybe you can take this further, but like you're a natural partner to really any of these companies. I wouldn't say any of them should look at you and say, hey, you threaten my existence or my being, but maybe talk a little bit more about that, because I think a big challenge with adoption, if we talk about we need more adoption of technology, generally technology, because we need to decarbonize real estate. Well, if you can't adopt because you can't even figure out the market, and this is something I've talked about for years, that's going to be a problem. But if you're able to create kind of an on-ramp or a glide path to decarbonization, regardless of who you end up working with, that's a good thing. So I think that's one of the most interesting things about WattCarbon. I mean, you're not necessarily going to go talk to all hundreds of companies today and say, hey, you should all work with me. But eventually you can build up partnerships with those firms and I think be a net benefit to them.
Totally. I mean, we're in the early days of what we call the decarbonization economy. And we see, anytime you have this kind of new emerging technology space, and the way we think about it is all the investments we're making into, removing the emissions from our buildings, it's going to be messy. for a while, right? Where people are trying to bite off
Yeah.
little chunks of it and trying to figure out who's who and how you're going to interact with but at the kind of core of all that it starts to emerge these systems of record. And we think of this just like you would run your business with a P&L, right? And not kind of an annual bank account statement or something. You need that level of granularity into what's working and what's not working. And so as you have these software vendors that come in and they make sometimes some pretty eye-popping claims about we're going to reduce your energy use by whatever percent, and
right.
And maybe they're right, but this is an empirical question, and if you have a system of record there, you can kind of start to make these investments into these technologies. You can manage the complexity of your entire portfolio, which is oftentimes one of the big challenges. Is it's not just one building we're talking about; it's maybe dozens of buildings. You have many tenants within your buildings, and so as you start to build out the system of record and the feedback that you can develop from these investments that you're making, now you're able to start to manage this just like any other line of business. And I think that's been the challenge so far, has been treating it as a sustainability feature, which is maybe disconnected a little bit from the business, or it's like kind of sits on its own. We want this in the hands of the CFO at the end of the day, right? This needs to be an economic tool, a business tool, and not just, I mean, no offense to the marketing people, but like when it's in the hands of the marketing department, it's in the wrong hands. They're an important stakeholder because you've got to tell the story around this. But unless as an organization you've kind of merged the marketing and the CFO, I think you're missing out on the real opportunity. So as we think about it, there's a again, this amazing technology companies that are out there bringing like these control systems and the grid interactivity and optimizing your own systems, and then building solar and batteries and geothermal systems and all of these. This becomes an integral part of your business, but you can't deploy it as a business until you have that system of record that allows you to put it all into one place.
Right. And it's funny you note the one quick thing, and then Louis, I'll go to you. It's funny. Yeah, I remember back what got me from consultant doing spreadsheet-based carbon inventory work to software-based carbon inventory and energy management work. That was late 2000s, right? 2008, 9, 10, where you had kind of the first wave of technology companies that were venture-backed. There were obviously companies before that maybe weren't venture-backed, but they had just kind of built a business more around energy management, energy bill pay, things like that. And the pitch across the board was you need a system of record for carbon data. You have a CRM, you have an ERP, you have so on and so forth. SAP bought one of these companies. I don't think it really worked out because I think they saw that thesis of, well, we're the financial system of record in a lot of cases. We need the carbon system of record. But that was all predicated on more regulation, higher. It was too early, I think, among other problems. But that still remains a core need. It's just figuring out, is it just a software solution where you can see charts and graphs and dashboards, or is it something more than that?
And I think they all thought about it wrong. This is yes. So like the idea is that you need it, and we saw this like 2 or 3 years ago, where there's like a gajillion companies that got funded to be like your carbon accounting software, and they're all doing it wrong. The idea was like, oh, we're going to calculate your carbon footprint and allow you to report that to GRESB or whoever your accounting overlords were. I mean, it's fine. Like, and there will be a couple of businesses that do that and probably make good money responding to that regulatory requirement for reporting. But that's not why we're here. We're here because we want to actually decarbonize. And decarbonizing is a very different act than carbon accounting. And what you're trying to really think about is like, what's the return on investment that I'm getting from the actions that I'm taking to achieve my decarbonization goals, to go to net zero? And if you're a carbon accounting platform, you're generally not at all thinking about that problem. You're thinking about tabulating a footprint. And so I think as the next generation, like this is why this is the next frontier in energy decarbonization, is that it's an entirely new way of approaching the problem. Where now I need to get capital deployed efficiently and effectively to achieve that goal, without pissing away all of my resources in chasing bad ideas. And I think that's kind of like where the entire ecosystem needs to now kind of evolve into. It's enough to just fine. We more or less know what our emissions are now at this point. It's like we're kind of splitting hairs around scope 3. Like, what we really need to know is how well our investments are working out.
Right. It's funny. I saw it shared on LinkedIn maybe last week, but it was I think it was McKinsey. I was going to put it in the newsletter this coming month, but it's from like May. It was a survey of just as a sustainability leader, sustainability or ESG, but the one responsible, or the team responsible for doing the reporting. It was mostly just a breakdown. How much time do you spend reporting? How much time do you spend actually decarbonizing? And it was basically just I spend all my time reporting. And part of that is because there's a lot of standards. There's a lot of work there. But I think that is emerging as a bigger problem. Now, in just direct conversations I've had with individual leaders of sustainability, or sustainability leaders at some of these firms, they say, look, I have more than 40 hours a week of work around reporting alone, and that's required, right? Like, everyone is pressuring me. The ecosystem is saying you need to do that. And I think it's good that this is becoming a higher awareness issue, because to your point, that's not really getting us where we need to go, even though it was, I think the idea of reporting was more visibility, more transparency will drive more reduction in carbon. It's just, I think we need to accelerate that.
It's the last part of that. It's sort of like the shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? Like like, hey, we're going down. Okay, yes. We've lost 4 feet. In the last.
Make sure the chairs are strapped in, and so they don't go in. It's like I don't think we need to save the chairs. It's a good point.
Can imagine that Exxon is having a field day with all of this reporting that we're doing. While we're busy reporting, they're busy drilling more oil. And at the end of the day, it's either we're decarbonizing or we're not.
Yeah, exactly. Lewis, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect segue, because I think with the news and just some of the conversations you can have in the industry, there's a lot of people that are concerned about whether this is even possible. Obviously, we don't see many great marketplaces out there similar to WattCarbon, but I mean, from your side, McGee, what's your view? And it's probably tied to the business, but just keen to get your thoughts in terms of, like, are we actually making progress here?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's really hard to see from like a 10,000 foot view. I don't know what the right number of feet is, but when you're zoomed out, it can seem like progress is slow and incremental. But then when you zoom in and you look at these companies like the Elephant Energies of the world that are doing this work, we've got a series on our blog that we call Every Watt Hour Tells a Story. And we feature companies that are on the front lines doing this great work. And you see them, figuring out how to put, microgrids into community centers for resilience purposes. You see them figuring out how to deploy batteries at scale in novel ways. You see, those who are trying to have an impact, put their money where their mouth is. We've had, in the marketplace, it's obviously not huge yet, but hundreds of thousands of dollars of commitments in the last couple of months that are purchasing these EACs from these projects that are actually out there decarbonizing the world. And I run across it every day, folks who are like, I see the world, I see what's happening in the world, and I don't love it. In fact, it's terrifying me, and I want to do something about it. And so far, my options have been, like checking the little box to buy carbon offsets when I fly, when I buy my airline ticket or something like that, and that feels really inadequate. So what folks are looking for are real solutions that actually make a difference, and those are hard to build, And I can tell you, like, wrangling a marketplace together where you've got both sides, and they both like what the other one is offering, and we can make the transaction seamless. That's really hard to do. But at the end of the day, the unlock that starts to achieve is incredible. And just, if we think about 10 years ago, how crazy it was that, you could just get an Uber and it would take you anywhere, or get an Airbnb and you could stay anywhere. I think, in 10 years from now, we're going to laugh at the fact that we felt so stymied in our efforts to accelerate decarbonization, right? The massive environmental problem facing us seems so hard to solve. And yet here we are 10 years later on the road to not just, mitigating all of those emissions, preventing, the acceleration of climate change, but really reinvesting in our communities. Like that's, in which at the end of the day, I think is what this is really all about, right? It's like, how do we make that capital investment into the places that we live, the places that we work, the lives that we lead, so that our future is better for our kids than it was for us. And I think that, I think binds us together at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice way to cap it off.
It's a good way to cap it off. Yeah. I mean, I think I appreciate you joining us, McGee. I've always kind of been impressed by what you're building. I mean, to be frank, like that's the reason why I made a small angel investment, right? Because I think what you're doing enables everything else. It's an unlock for everything else. And that's not very common for me, just given the position I have. But yeah, no, it's great for you to kind of be on the LinkedIn Live with us just to share what you're working on. Where can folks find more? WattCarbon.com and
WattCarbon.com.
Right?
Yeah, we'd love to talk. It's an exciting time, so definitely can reach out to us.
And then we'll see you at Blueprint. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, my conference, Blueprint, RE Plus, Climate Week in New York, Verge, at the end of October. So busy season for us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be at some of those, not others. It was actually nice a year ago when RE Plus and
NexusCon. I forgot NexusCon in there.
Yeah, of course.
Of
That's actually first. Yeah, right here at home in Colorado. It was nice when RE Plus and Blueprint were actually on the same opposite or different floors. What am I trying to say? Different floors, but the same convention center within Las Vegas, which like every hotel has a convention center. So that was nice to be able to just walk the floor. I actually ran into some folks at RE Plus, but now it's in Anaheim, I think. So
Anaheim, yeah, and they're a week apart, so it'll be Vegas.
Yeah,
Anaheim, then Vegas, then New York, then Denver.
Yep. Yeah.
Fun time. Carbon footprint. I got to plant a couple of trees to make up for all that airline flying this next month.
That's very true.
Yeah,
it's very true.
Or decarbonize some buildings.
Yeah. You can buy me a heat pump if you'd like.
Perfect. Sounds like a deal.
Well, guys, really appreciate your time. I'll see you all at Blueprint. Joe, I'll see you next week. But McGee, once again, thank you for joining us on the Download with Joe.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, McGee. Thanks. Bye.
Are we off?
Oh.
Okay. Can I?
I guess we're. You can get off. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, McGee, that was great. Thanks for the time. Good. Yeah. Have a good morning.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. Bye.